It was the kind of night that made your skin feel damp just from standing outside. Humid, thick, with a smell of summer weeds and old water trapped in gutters. I remember the air conditioning in my car struggling, the windows fogging slightly at the edges as I drove, the pizza box on the passenger seat making the car smell like garlic and melted cheese. I was working the late shift for Antonio's, a little family-run pizza place near the edge of town. They paid decent and didn't ask too many questions as long as you showed up on time. That night, I got a call-in order around 9:40 p.m., which was weird since we closed at 10. But the owner took it anyway. Last order of the night, cash tip way out near the Ridge Roads. I almost argued, but I needed the extra cash. The address was odd. 1857 Chandler Hollow Road. I'd never heard of it, but my GPS picked it up after buffering a few seconds. It was past the town limits into a stretch of rural road that looked like it hadn't been paved since the 90s. Trees crowded in tight, leaning like they were eavesdropping, and every now and then I'd pass an old mailbox hanging off rusted chains with no house in sight. I figured I'd be delivering to one of those rundown properties you see in horror movies. Creaky porches, yards full of dead cars, and sagging sheds. It took about 20 minutes to reach the location. The GPS chirped, "You've arrived," just as I saw a narrow dirt driveway curling off the main road. There was no mailbox, no lights, just that empty tone of silence when you kill your engine and all the cicadas hush like someone hit mute. I left the car idling with the headlights on, took the pizza box and started up the driveway on foot because it was so overgrown it looked like no one had driven up it in years. My shoes crunched over gravel and weeds, and somewhere to my right I heard something rustle, too heavy to be a raccoon. I ignored it and kept walking. After about 100 feet, the trees opened up to reveal a house. 2-story, peeling paint. Roof half caved in one corner, but the porch light was on, a dull yellow bulb that flickered like it was struggling for power. There was something off about the symmetry of the place. The windows too small, the front door slightly too tall. It gave me that feeling like seeing a familiar face with one feature subtly wrong. Still, I was paid to deliver, not critique architecture. I stepped up on the porch. The boards groaned, and the air had that strange sweet-sour smell you get from places that have been damp too long. Mold, rot, maybe something else. I knocked. No answer. Knocked again. Louder. Then the door creaked open about 6 inches, slow and dragging, but I hadn't touched it. I cleared my throat. Pizza delivery for, I checked the receipt. There was no name, just the address. "Hey, anyone here?" Nothing. Then from deeper in the house, a voice, barely above a whisper. "Come in." Every rational part of me said, "Nope." But something else, curiosity, maybe stupidity, pulled me forward. I pushed the door open farther with my foot and stepped inside. It was cold. Too cold for summer. And dark. The only light came from a weak table lamp in the next room, just enough to cast long shadows through the doorway. I stepped into what might have once been a living room. The furniture was covered in yellowed sheets. The walls stained with blotches that looked like old water damage, or maybe worse. There was no sign of anyone. I called out again. "Hello? Over here." The voice again, low, same tone, coming from upstairs this time. I looked up at the staircase. It curved along the far wall, cloaked in shadows. The top of the stairs was pitch black. I should have left. I should have left that pizza on the floor, turned around, and bolted. But I kept thinking, maybe someone elderly, sick, couldn't get down the stairs. Maybe it was someone with dementia who ordered food and forgot. I took one cautious step up, then another. The steps creaked and groaned under my weight. Halfway up, I heard a door creak open above me. I reached the top and saw a hallway to my right. 4 closed doors. One cracked open slightly, light flickering behind it. The door at the end. I walked toward it, heart racing. Each step felt heavier, like the floorboards were trying to hold me back. As I neared the door, I caught a glimpse of something in the room, a rocking chair. Moving. I pushed the door open with the edge of the pizza box. The chair was rocking, but no one sat in it. I froze. And then something moved in the corner. A figure, sitting on the floor. I could barely make it out. Legs bent, arms wrapped around knees, head down, wearing something gray and loose, maybe a gown or robe. I couldn't tell. The light flickered again, and for a second, I swear the room shifted, like the corners stretched away and the walls breathed. I took a slow step back. Hey, I've got your pizza. The figure didn't move. Then it lifted its head. Pale face, eyes dark and wide, not like someone surprised, but like holes in a mask. Empty. Bottomless. The mouth opened, but made no sound. Then suddenly, a sound did come. From behind me, footsteps on the stairs. I spun around. No one there. When I turned back into the room, the figure was gone. The rocking chair still rocked, but the rest of the room was empty. I backed down the hallway fast, not caring how loud my footsteps were. I hit the stairs running. But the moment my foot touched the top step, every light in the house went out. And something screamed. Not from a human throat. It was layered, distorted, like something imitating a scream but not understanding how one should sound. I stumbled down the stairs, barely able to see, holding the pizza box like it could protect me. As I reached the front door, it slammed shut in my face. I yanked on the handle. Locked. From the darkness behind me came the sound of something crawling, nails or fingers dragging over wood. Close. Getting closer, I banged on the door with my fist. "Let me out!" A whisper, right in my ear. Delivery accepted. The door swung open, and I fell through it onto the porch. The light flickered one last time and went out. I bolted down the driveway, tripping, crashing through weeds until I reached my car. The engine was still running, headlights on. Driver's side door wide open. I jumped in and slammed the door, threw it in reverse without looking. The tires skidded on gravel, and I nearly fishtailed into a ditch. I didn't care. I just wanted distance. Back at the shop, I told Antonio I'd dropped the pizza and no one was there. He shrugged and told me to go home. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I looked up the address out of sheer obsession, 1857 Chandler Hollow Road, but nothing came up. I checked county records, old property maps. The road existed, but no house had stood at that number for over 30 years. Burned down in 1992. The family who lived there, 2 adults, 1 child, never found. People said the fire wasn't natural, no origin point, just started all at once, consumed the place in minutes. I drove out there again in the daylight, just to be sure. Found the same dirt driveway, now clearly blocked with a fallen tree that looked like it'd been there for decades. No house, no porch light, just the outline of a foundation hidden in the grass and rubble. A single scorched piece of wood, and beside it, sitting neatly on the ground, was an empty pizza box. From Antonio's, with my handwriting on the receipt, story the end. It was the first week of October when I started the job at Tony's Pizza. I was 22, just out of college, and in need of quick cash before I figured out what to do with my life. Delivering pizzas didn't seem like the worst option. Easy tips, short hours, and I liked driving around at night. There was something calming about the quiet streets and the warm smell of pepperoni rising from the passenger seat. Tony, the owner, was a stocky guy in his 60s with slicked back gray hair and a voice like gravel. He didn't say much beyond what was needed for the job. "Don't take more than 3 deliveries at once," he'd grunt, "and don't go past that ridge west of town. If an order comes from there, send it back." He said it like a joke, but with just enough edge in his voice to make me wonder. The ridge he referred to was a small rise beyond Old County Road 12, a forgotten stretch of farmland and thick woods that didn't show up clearly on Google Maps. I didn't ask why it was off limits. Not then. The first few weeks were uneventful. Late-night college kids, big family orders, and the occasional weird customer who wanted me to wait outside and leave the pizza on the porch. Nothing out of the ordinary. But then one night, just after 10:30 p.m., the phone rang at the front desk, and Mike, one of the other drivers, answered it. He raised an eyebrow and looked at me. "Hey, Danny," he said, "you mind taking one more? I'm about to clock out." I nodded and took the slip of paper from him. The address was handwritten, 73 Old Hollow Lane. The name read C. Holloway. I checked the map. Old Hollow Lane didn't show up on the GPS, but I knew where it roughly was. It was past the ridge. I stared at it, hesitating. Tony said not to deliver out there. Mike shrugged. "Then don't tell him. Look, it's just 1 pie, and the guy tipped $20 on the call." $20 wasn't nothing. I figured maybe Tony was just being paranoid. The road probably had bad reception or crazy dogs or whatever. So I grabbed the hot bag and headed out. The night was darker than usual. No moon, just a hazy cloud cover and the occasional flicker of a distant lightning storm far off toward the hills. My tires crunched along gravel roads, that hadn't seen a county truck in years. As I passed over the ridge, I lost cell service, just like I'd feared. The GPS rerouted and froze. I drove slow, trying not to damage the undercarriage on the potholes. After about 10 minutes, I came to a crooked wooden sign that read Old Hollow L Inn nailed to a post. The letters were nearly worn off. I turned in. The road narrowed into something barely wide enough for my car. Trees grew close on both sides, gnarled and looming, branches reaching like twisted arms. It felt less like a street and more like a path someone had cleared half a century ago and never bothered to maintain. After what felt like forever, I saw a faint light through the trees. A single porch bulb glowed on a weathered house. It was 2 stories but looked like it hadn't been lived in for decades. The shutters hung loose. The paint peeled off in scabs. The air around it smelled faintly of damp earth and something sour. I parked and stepped out, the pizza box tucked under one arm. I didn't see any car, but I noticed a rocking chair slowly moving on the porch, creaking back and forth, even though there wasn't any wind. I walked up the steps. They groaned under my weight. I knocked on the door. Nothing. I knocked again, louder. Still nothing. Then I heard it, shuffling inside like someone dragging their feet across the floorboards. I waited. A full minute passed. Finally, the door creaked open. The man standing there was tall, thin, and wore an old-fashioned cardigan over a buttoned shirt. His face was pale and long, and his eyes looked milky like he'd been blind a long time. But they focused on me with eerie accuracy. "You're late," he said in a hoarse voice. I blinked. Sorry. Roads were rough." He opened the door wider and motioned for me to come in. "No, it's okay," I said, trying to smile. "I can just hand it to you here." But he kept that arm out, unmoving, the other hand open for the pizza. Reluctantly, I stepped inside, just past the threshold. The house was dark and smelled of mold. The walls were lined with faded wallpaper and old photographs, the kind that used to be taken with flashbulbs and had that sepia tone. Dust floated thick in the air. He took the pizza and handed me a $20 bill. "Keep the change," he rasped. I nodded and turned to leave. As I reached the door, I heard it. A faint whisper. It didn't come from him. It came from deeper in the house. "Help me." I froze. It was so soft I almost thought I imagined it. I turned back. The man was gone. The living room was now empty. The door behind me slammed shut. I jumped and ran back to it, but the knob wouldn't budge. Locked. "Hello?" I called out, trying not to panic. "Hey, sir, could you open the door?" There was no reply. Then I heard the creaking, slow, heavy steps on the stairs, something coming down. I turned, squinting in the dark, and saw a figure descending. At first I thought it was the man again, but this thing was hunched and wearing what looked like a long, tattered nightgown. Its skin was gray, thin, stretched like parchment. It was a woman. She lifted her head, and I saw her eyes were missing, just 2 dark sockets staring into nothing. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. She lifted a skeletal hand and pointed toward the back hallway. Something in me said, "Don't go." But my body started moving on its own. As I stepped into the hallway, the air grew colder. I could see my breath. The lights above flickered, casting long, moving shadows. A door stood half open at the end of the hall. Inside was a room with old furniture, a bed, and a mirror cracked straight down the middle. The mirror. I walked toward it. Something about it felt wrong, like it wasn't just a reflection, and in the glass I saw them. People. Faces. Dozens of them, trapped behind the mirror's surface, screaming silently. Their mouths opened wide, eyes bulging. They looked real, too real, not like tricks of the light. Then one of them reached out, a pale hand pressing against the inside of the glass, and the mirror cracked further, lines snaking outward like spider webs. I backed away. The whisper came again, louder this time. "Help us." And then another voice, this one harsh and close. "No one leaves." I spun around, and the man was there again, standing in the doorway, face twisted in rage. I lunged past him and ran down the hall. The house seemed to stretch. Rooms appeared where they hadn't been. Doorways led nowhere. I turned corners that should have brought me to the foyer, only to find myself back at that same hallway. I was trapped. Finally, I slammed through a door and found myself in the kitchen. There was a small window above the sink. Without thinking, I grabbed a stool and hurled it through the glass. It shattered. I climbed out, cutting my arm on the shards, and ran toward the car. When I looked back, the porch light was gone. The house was completely dark, almost like it had never been lit to begin with. I got in the car and sped down the narrow path, bumping over roots and rocks, not caring if I damaged the undercarriage. My hands were shaking the whole time. Back at Tony's, I burst in, pale and bleeding. Tony stood behind the counter, brows furrowed. "You went past the ridge." I nodded, breathless. "Old Hollow?" he asked. "Yeah." He exhaled slowly, like he'd seen a ghost himself. "They still ordering pizzas?" "What do you mean, still?" He went into the back and came out with a dusty, yellowing binder. Inside were old delivery records, dating back decades. There was one page dated from the early 90s. It read, "Customer C. Holloway, address 73 Old Hollow Lane." Tony flipped the page. Another entry, same name, same address, dated 1981. Then another from 1967. Always the same. He looked at me grimly. "That house burned down in 58. Family died inside. Holloway was the father." I stared at him. "So who did I deliver to?" Tony didn't answer. I quit the next day, couldn't sleep for weeks after. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those faces in the mirror. Silent screams, reaching hands, and that woman pointing down the hallway. Sometimes I wonder if the next kid who ignores Tony's warning will go deeper into that house, far enough that he doesn't come back. Story the end. It was just after 10:30 p.m. on a cold November night when I got the call for a delivery out to the outskirts of town. I had been working at Tommaso's Pizza for about 4 months, saving up for college classes, and the shift that night had been dead quiet. I remember leaning against the counter with my earbuds in, half watching the clock, ready to call it a night when the order came through. Large pepperoni, garlic knots, and a 2-liter of root beer. Nothing unusual about it, except for the address. "Hey, you ever been out to Sycamore Hollow Road?" I asked Kevin, the guy who usually closed with me. Kevin didn't answer right away. He looked up from the register and his eyes narrowed slightly. "That place still comes up in the system?" I shrugged. "I mean, it's in the delivery zone, right?" He rubbed the back of his neck and walked around the counter. "Yeah, technically. Just weird, that's all. No one's lived out there in years. Not since that fire." That caught my attention. "What fire?" He waved it off. "Forget it, man. Probably just some squatters or some drunk kids. Just drop it off and come back. Don't bother knocking twice if no one answers." I laughed, trying to keep things light. "Come on, what happened? This some kind of local legend?" Kevin lowered his voice. "All I know is back in 2007 or so, there was a fire at that house, old Victorian-looking place at the very end of Sycamore Hollow. Family of 3 died in it. Some said it was arson, but no one got arrested. Thing is, weird stuff kept happening out there after the fire. Lights flickering when the power was shut off, people claiming they heard screams. Cops went out a few times, but nothing ever came of it. Eventually, it just got boarded up. No one's lived there since. I should have said no. I should have passed it off to Kevin, or even just claimed I couldn't find the address. But I was curious, and I needed the tips. The drive out there wasn't anything special at first. Sycamore Hollow Road was off Route 16, about 6 miles from the nearest gas station. As soon as I turned onto it, my cell service dropped out. The trees grew dense, gnarled branches stretching overhead like fingers. There were no streetlights. My headlights bounced along cracked pavement, and every now and then I caught glimpses of rusted fences, leaning sheds, and abandoned mailboxes. The GPS showed I was less than a mile away when I saw the house. It rose up at the end of the road like something out of a Gothic novel. 2 stories tall, the wooden siding blackened from age, and what I assumed was fire damage. The windows were either boarded up or broken. A tattered curtain fluttered from an upstairs pane, even though I couldn't feel a breeze. I parked in the overgrown gravel driveway, left the engine running, and grabbed the food. I wasn't planning to be there more than 30 seconds. As I walked up the porch steps, they groaned beneath my weight. The front door looked like it hadn't been used in a decade. Paint peeled off in long flakes, the handle rusted. But before I could knock, the door opened. No creak, no delay, just open, smooth, like someone had been expecting me. A woman stood in the doorway, mid-30s, pale, thin, with stringy brown hair that hung around her face. Her dress looked old-fashioned, the kind of thing you'd see in a black and white photo. Long sleeves, high color, faded blue cotton. "You're late," she said flatly. I blinked. "Sorry, took a little time to find the place." She didn't respond, just turned and walked into the house. I hesitated at the threshold. Something in my gut told me not to step inside. But the wind had picked up, and it was cold. So I followed her in. The air smelled like mold and something faintly metallic, blood or rust, I couldn't tell. The hallway was dark, except for the flicker of candles placed on narrow tables. The floor creaked with every step I took. The woman walked ahead silently, almost gliding. "I'll set the food down here," I called after her. She didn't respond. She turned left into a room, and I followed. It was a dining room, or had been once. The table in the center was covered in dust, except for a spotless white cloth set at one end. A place had been set: plate, fork, napkin, glass. She gestured at the table. "Put it there." I did as she asked. "That'll be $18.75. She stared at me for a moment, then turned and walked out of the room. I stood there, wondering what I was supposed to do. Leave the food and go? Follow her? Then I heard something upstairs. It was soft, like a shuffle or a footstep. I froze, listening. Another step, then another. It sounded like someone pacing. My skin prickled. I turned back toward the front door, deciding I'd had enough. But as I passed the hallway mirror, I saw something that stopped me cold. There was no reflection. Not of the woman. Not of me. The hallway mirror reflected the room, but it was empty. I reached out and touched the glass. It was solid, cold. I stumbled back, heart pounding. That's when I noticed the photos on the wall. Black and white family portraits, the kind you'd see from the early 1900s. One showed the woman I'd just seen, standing beside a man and a little girl. Only the man's face had been burned away, the photo charred, the little girl's eyes had been scratched out. I turned around and ran for the door. The moment I grabbed the handle, it slammed shut. Hard. The sound echoed through the house. I pulled, twisted, nothing. It was stuck or locked, I couldn't tell. I kicked at it. Still nothing. Then I heard a giggle behind me. Slow, high-pitched, childlike. I turned around. The hallway was empty. The giggle came again, this time from upstairs. "Nope," I said out loud, backing away. As I did, something cold brushed my arm. I yelped and spun around. Nothing. But the air was definitely colder. I could see my breath. A creaking noise started above me. Footsteps. Moving across the floor. I looked up and saw dust falling from the ceiling with each step. Whatever it was moving toward the stairs. I bolted back toward the dining room, looking for another exit. The woman was sitting at the table now, her back to me. I hadn't heard her return. "I think I'm just going to leave," I said, trying to sound calm. She didn't answer. Then she started humming. A soft, eerie lullaby. I'd never heard it before, but it sent a chill through me. I backed away slowly, trying not to make noise. Then the candlelight flickered, and all of them went out. Total darkness. I fumbled for my phone. The flashlight came on and illuminated the dining room. The woman was gone. The chair was still pulled out. The plate was empty. I felt a breath on my neck. I turned the light around. Nothing. Then, in the beam of the flashlight, I saw the little girl. She stood in the corner, arms at her sides, hair hanging over her face. She wore a dress that looked decades old, tattered at the hem. Her hands were covered in soot. Her eyes were just wrong, hollow, as if something was moving behind them. "Get out," she whispered. I didn't need to be told twice. I ran to the kitchen, hoping there was a back door. I found it and threw it open. It wasn't locked, thank God, and I stumbled out into the yard, sprinting toward my car. Behind me, I heard the front door open again. Footsteps. Running. I didn't look back. I jumped into the car, threw the pizza bag into the passenger seat, and floored it in reverse, tires kicking up gravel. As I sped back down Sycamore Hollow Road, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The woman and the little girl were standing in the driveway, watching me. Neither moved. Their faces were lit by some unnatural light, as if the house was on fire behind them, but the structure itself looked dark and untouched. I drove straight back to the shop and burst in, white as a sheet. Kevin looked up from the register and immediately frowned. "What happened?" I dropped the empty pizza bag on the counter. "Don't ever send anyone out there again." He didn't ask for details. He just nodded slowly. "I'll take care of it," he said. I never worked another delivery shift after that. I transferred to the kitchen, and a month later, I quit altogether. A few weeks after that, the address disappeared from our system. Kevin said it must have been a glitch. But sometimes, when I drive past Route 16 late at night, I still think I see a dim glow way off in the trees, like candlelight or fire, And once, just once, I thought I saw a little girl standing at the tree line, watching the road. Story the end. It was the second week of November when I started working at Joey's Pizza in Akron, Ohio. I'd lost my warehouse job a few months earlier and needed something to keep me afloat while I figured things out. The pizza joint wasn't much, just a dingy corner spot that did more deliveries than dine-ins, but the boss, Joey himself, was decent, and the tips were okay, especially on weekends. The deliveries were usually routine, same neighborhoods, same people, same rundown apartment complexes. Most orders came from students, single folks, or tired families too lazy to cook. Nothing exciting, just drop the box, get your cash, maybe a thank you if you were lucky. It was a cold Thursday night when I got a delivery that didn't sit right. We'd had a lull for almost an hour when the phone rang. Joey answered and jotted down the details quickly. "Hey, Eric," he said, handing me the ticket and a large pepperoni. "This one's weird. Said they'd leave cash under the mat, just drop the pie off at the door. No need to knock or wait. Address is out near Ridgewood Drive. You good?" Ridgewood wasn't far, but the address wasn't familiar. It was farther up into the hills where older houses stood apart and most had been left to decay. I asked Joey if the customer left a name. He shook his head. "Just said the White House at the Bend. No number, no name. Creepy, right?" I grabbed the pizza and the address slip. I wasn't thrilled, but deliveries were deliveries. The drive was quiet. Akron's streets thinned as I turned onto Ridgewood, and the houses began to space out. A few porch lights flickered weakly, and most driveways were empty. It felt like driving into a forgotten pocket of the city. Finally, I reached the bend Joey mentioned. There it was, a 2-story white house tucked behind overgrown hedges and half-dead trees. The place looked abandoned. Windows were dark, the paint was peeling in long strips, and the porch sagged on one side. But I figured maybe someone eccentric or older still lived there. I parked on the gravel and walked up the crooked steps. The porch creaked loudly under my feet. A moth buzzed around the dim porch light, the only sign of life. I crouched and found a folded 20 under the doormat. No note. I set the box down as instructed and turned to leave. That's when I heard it. A whisper, just behind me. "Don't go yet." I froze. It was faint. Could have been the wind, but then I heard it again, clearer this time. "Don't go yet." I spun around. No one there. The porch was empty. My pulse spiked as I glanced at the door. Still shut tight, no lights behind the windows. I stood there for a few seconds, listening. Nothing. I shook it off. Maybe a prank? Maybe a speaker hidden somewhere? Either way, I wasn't sticking around. I got back to my car and drove off. Feeling the hair on the back of my neck stand up the whole way back, Joey laughed when I told him. Maybe the house is haunted. Some old guy died up there, I think, years ago. Hung himself or something. Heard it from one of the mailmen. Great. Just great. That night, I kept thinking about the voice. It had been too real, not something you just imagine. But I let it go. The next night, the same order came in. Same deal, pepperoni, cash under the mat, leave it and go. Joey asked if I wanted to pass on it, but I said no. I needed the tips. It was colder and the street was even darker than before. When I pulled up, something felt off. The porch light was off this time, and the house looked even more rundown in the dark. I used my phone flashlight as I walked up the steps, found the money under the mat again, left the box, started to walk away. This time, I heard something else. Knocking. From inside the house. 3 slow knocks. I stopped on the porch and stared at the door. No one opened it, no lights came on, just silence. Then the knocking started again. 3 knocks, this time faster, and then a whisper. "Please come in." I backed away. "Nope," I muttered, practically jogging back to my car. I drove off with my heart hammering in my chest. Back at the shop, I told Joey again. He raised an eyebrow but didn't laugh this time. "Okay, that's weird," he said. "Maybe some kid messing around or a squatter." "Doesn't feel like a prank," I said. Felt wrong. Joey nodded slowly. "You don't have to take those anymore. I'll send Mike or Chris next time." But the next time that order came in, 2 days later, neither Mike nor Chris was working. Joey asked if I wanted to skip it, but I said I'd go. Part of me wanted answers. Same instructions, same voice, same creepy house. This time, I brought a flashlight and kept my phone recording in my jacket pocket. As I pulled up, I noticed something new, curtains moving. Just a flutter behind one of the upstairs windows. I stared for a moment, then climbed the porch steps again. No light. Found the cash. set the box down. Before I could turn away, the door creaked open. No one was standing there, just the door slowly opening inward with a long groan. "Come in." I backed up, pointing my flashlight into the dark doorway. I couldn't see anything beyond the threshold, just a narrow hallway choked with shadows. Then a figure moved at the far end of the hall, pale, thin, like a woman. She stepped into the light for just a second. No eyes, just black sockets. Her head tilted and her mouth began to open. I ran, down the steps almost tripping and into my car. I didn't stop driving until I got back to the pizza place. Joey saw my face and didn't ask questions. He just nodded. "No more deliveries to Ridgewood. I'll block the number." But it didn't stop there. That night, I woke up to a knocking sound. 3 knocks, slow and steady. I sat up in bed, heart pounding. My apartment was dark. I thought I might have imagined it. Then I heard it again, this time closer. 3 knocks on my bedroom door. I live alone. I didn't move. I didn't speak, just stared at the door, waiting. Then a voice whispered, "You forgot something." I finally found the courage to turn on the light. The knocking stopped. The voice went silent. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed up with every light on, a kitchen knife in my lap. The next morning, I called off work, but something even worse happened that afternoon. I got a notification on my phone, video saved, 3 days ago. It was the recording I made during the last delivery. I hadn't looked at it since that night. My hands shook as I opened the video. It started normal, me walking up the porch, flashlight in hand, muttering about the cold. Then it showed the door opening, but in the recording, it didn't look like it had moved on its own. There was a hand, pale, thin, clutching the edge of the door, and behind it, clear as day, stood the woman, the same eyeless face, black mouth stretching into a silent scream. I hadn't seen her that clearly in person. The video ended with static, just harsh white noise for a few seconds, then black. That night, the knocking came back. 3 knocks at 3:13 a.m., every night after that, always at the same time. Always 3 knocks. I moved out of that apartment 2 weeks later. Even now, the knocks return sometimes. Not every night, but often enough. I'll hear them in hotel rooms or when I visit my brother in Chicago, or even once while camping in the middle of nowhere. Always 3 knocks. Always followed by that whisper. "You forgot something." Joey's Pizza shut down last winter. I looked up Ridgewood Drive on a whim recently and found a forum talking about local haunted spots. Someone posted a photo of the White House. Someone else commented, "That house burned down in 1998. Nothing's been there for over 20 years. I stared at that comment for a long time. Then I heard 3 knocks on the window behind me. Story the end. Back in 2016, I was delivering pizzas for a local place in a small town outside Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. The money wasn't great, but the tips on weekends were decent, and I liked driving around, listening to music, not having anyone micromanage me. It was a quiet area, mostly residential neighborhoods, lots of woods and farmland surrounding it, with a few back roads that twisted off into more isolated homes. You got the occasional weird house, but it was mostly uneventful, until one night. It was a Saturday shift in mid-October. The air was already crisp and some of the leaves were coming off in sheets. Business had picked up with the cold weather, and we were slammed. I had 3 back-to-back deliveries, but the last one of the night was a single large sausage pizza and a side of cheesy breadsticks. The ticket had a handwritten note at the bottom, "Use side door. Please do not knock more than once." That wasn't totally unusual. Some people had dogs or babies or just hated noise. The address, though, caught my eye. It was a house I had never seen before, on a road I didn't recognize. Larkspur Lane. It wasn't even marked on the GPS app I used. The manager, Devin, had to dig it up on Google Maps and show me where it forked off an old county road. I asked him how far out it was, and he shrugged. "It's in our zone. Someone paid online and tipped $20, man. Just go." I loaded up the food and headed out. Took me maybe 20 minutes to get to the turnoff, but once I was on Larkspur Lane, it got weird. The road was barely paved, more like a long, cracked driveway than an actual street. Trees crowded in on both sides, and fog was starting to build in patches around the base of the forest. My headlights cut through it, but the shadows danced and flickered, making it feel like something was always moving in the corner of my eye. I finally reached the house at the end of the road. 2 stories tall, old, maybe pre-World War II, but well-maintained. Freshly painted, a nice porch, flower pots that looked tended, but something about it felt off, like it was too perfect. The windows were all dark, no porch light, no car in the driveway, no signs of life. I double-checked the address. It was right. I parked, grabbed the pizza bag, and walked up the porch steps. The wood creaked under my feet, and the sound seemed too loud in the still air. I walked to the side door like the instructions said. It was plain, white, with a brass knob and a thin screen door over it. I knocked once, lightly. The door opened about 3 seconds later. A man stood there, maybe mid-50s, pale, thin hair combed straight back. He wore a dark cardigan over a button-up shirt and looked like he hadn't slept in a few days. His eyes were sunken in, and his skin had this washed-out look, like paper left out in the rain. "Thank you," he said quickly, almost too quickly, reaching for the pizza. Sure. 1 large sausage and cheesy sticks," I said, trying to smile. He nodded, took the bag, and handed me cash. I glanced at it. 20, just like the receipt said. As I turned to leave, he said something that stopped me cold. "She's been waiting for you." I turned back. "What?" He looked down at the bag in his hands and shook his head. "Nothing. Thank you." Then he shut the door before I could say anything else. I walked back to my car, trying to shake the chill that had crept up my spine. I told myself he was just some tired old guy, maybe drunk, maybe senile. But as I started the engine and turned the car around, I looked up at the house one more time. There was a figure in the upstairs window. A girl. Small, maybe 8 or 9 years old. She was staring straight at me. Her face was pale like the man's, her hair long and dark, hanging limp around her shoulders. She didn't blink. She didn't move. She just watched. I stared back for a few seconds before backing down the driveway. The trees swallowed the house behind me. I got back to the shop just after 10:30. Devin was counting the register, and the kitchen guys were already scrubbing down. "How was that last one?" he asked without looking up. "Creepy," I said. "Guy was weird. Said something about someone waiting for me." Devin finally looked at me. "What guy?" "The guy who answered the door." Devin stood upright, frowning. "You're saying someone actually answered?" "Yeah, old guy. Looked tired. Gave me cash. There was even a kid upstairs." Devin walked around the counter and pulled out the delivery ticket from the pile. He held it up to me. "This order was paid online. No cash option, and the notes said, 'Leave food on bench by side door. No contact.'" I felt the blood drain from my face. "No," I said. He answered the door, took the food, even said something to me. Devin stared at the ticket. "We've had prank orders before, but this one didn't flag anything. The address is real. I looked it up myself, but I think..." He trailed off. "You think what?" I pressed. He hesitated, then said, "I think you should talk to my cousin. She's on the fire department. She might know something about that house." I didn't sleep well that night. Couldn't stop thinking about the kid in the window. Her blank expression. How quiet the house was. I almost convinced myself it was just a weird family, maybe homeschooled kids or something. But the next day, I got a text from Devin with his cousin's number. I called her during my break. She answered after a couple rings. "This is Maria." "Hi, Maria, this is Jordan. I work with your cousin Devin. He said you might know something about a house on Larkspur Lane." Silence on the other end for a second. "Where on Larkspur?" "The very end. Big white house, 2-story, porch with flower pots." Another pause. Then she said, "That house burned down in 2003. I blinked. "What?" "Yeah. Family of 3. Parents and their daughter. Faulty space heater started a fire in the middle of the night. The girl was found upstairs in her bedroom. Parents didn't make it either." I felt my hands start to shake. "That can't be right. I was there. Last night. Delivered pizza." "No, you weren't," she said, her voice low. "There's nothing there now but the foundation and part of the porch. It's a clearing. I've seen it myself. Trees have overgrown most of it." I didn't know what to say. "You're sure it was that house?" she asked. "Positive." She sighed. "You're not the first one. Couple years ago, some kids said they saw lights there. We checked it out, but there was nothing. Just ashes and stone. That place, there's something wrong with it. Don't go back there. Whatever you saw, it wasn't alive." I hung up and didn't tell anyone else about the conversation. I needed a few days off work after that. Claimed I had a cold. I didn't tell Devin what Maria said. Didn't want to spook him or anyone else. But about a week later, I got curious. I needed to see for myself. I drove out to the old road on a Wednesday afternoon. No fog, no shadows, just daylight. I turned onto Larkspur Lane and immediately noticed the change. The road wasn't paved. It was more like an old logging path now, almost overgrown. My car barely made it halfway before I had to stop and walk. I followed the path to where I remembered the house being. There was no house, just a blackened stone foundation. A few charred beams, some melted aluminum siding, broken pottery that may have been flower pots. That was it. But sitting on the blackened concrete steps was an empty pizza bag. Our shop's logo stitched into the side. I stared at it for minutes, frozen. My breath came in shallow, fast. Then I heard something behind me, a soft creak. I turned around slowly, and for just a second I saw her again. The girl, standing in the woods, watching me. Then she was gone. I left the bag and walked back to my car. I quit 2 weeks later, moved out of town the following year. Sometimes I still dream about that night, about the man who wasn't there, about the girl upstairs, the fog, the creaking wood, the door that opened too quickly. I still wonder what he meant when he said she'd been waiting for me, and I still wonder what would have happened if I'd gone inside. Story the end. It was the summer of 2016 when I took a job delivering pizzas for a small family-owned place called Angelo's in the outskirts of Pittsburgh. I was 23, broke, and in desperate need of cash after dropping out of college. The work was simple enough: pick up the pie, drive to the address, drop it off, and collect cash. The hours were long, and the tips were hit or miss, but I didn't mind. I liked driving at night. The roads were quiet, and the world felt slower, calmer. Most nights were uneventful. Some rude customers here and there, a few wrong addresses, the occasional drunk college kid trying to tip me with a half-smoked joint. But I remember one night more than any other. The kind of night that stays under your skin years later, like a sliver of glass you never quite pull out. It was a Wednesday, slow and muggy, and I was about to head home around 10:30 when the phone rang. Angelo picked it up, listened for a moment, then scribbled something down and called to me from the counter. "One more delivery," he said, handing me a receipt and a large pepperoni. "You're on the way home anyway, right?" I looked at the address, Elmhurst Lane. Not far from where I lived at the time, but I didn't recognize the house number. "Do you know this place?" I asked, squinting at the smudged writing. Angelo nodded slowly, but his expression changed. It was subtle, his mouth pressed into a thinner line than usual, his eyes slightly more tired. "Yeah, house on the end of the road, big lot, old 2-story with red shutters." "That's the one?" I asked, sensing something in his voice. He hesitated. "Yeah, look, just drop it off and don't hang around, all right?" I raised an eyebrow. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing. It's late. People out there are strange." I didn't push him. The guy had been working that shop for over 30 years. He'd seen enough weird things to trust his gut. Still, I figured he was just being overcautious. Elmhurst Lane wasn't far, but it was one of those side streets you only notice when you're looking for it. I turned off the main road and drove into a neighborhood that felt stuck in time. The houses were spread far apart, trees hanging low, lawns overgrown, and fences broken. Most of the streetlights were out, leaving long patches of darkness between glows of pale orange. I reached the end of the road and spotted the house instantly. Just like Angelo said, 2 stories, red shutters, peeling paint, and a wide, empty lot around it. No cars in the driveway, no lights on inside. I parked on the gravel shoulder and grabbed the pizza. I approached the house slowly. The porch creaked as I stepped up. The front door was partially open. I knocked once, then twice. "Pizza delivery," I called. No answer. I was about to turn around when I heard footsteps inside. Slow, deliberate. I stepped back, suddenly uneasy. A voice called out from deeper in the house. It was low, male, and tired. "Come in. Leave it on the table." I didn't like that. We weren't supposed to enter houses. Angelo was firm on that policy, liability and all that. But something about the voice felt off, like it didn't belong in this time, like it had traveled a long way to get there. "I can just leave it here at the door," I said loudly, hoping whoever was inside would come out. No response. I turned to leave, but something compelled me to stop. I don't know why. It wasn't curiosity. It felt more like pressure, like gravity, like something was pulling me forward. I pushed the door open a little more and stepped inside. The air was thick, not dusty, but heavy, like it hadn't been breathed in years. The hallway was dark except for moonlight seeping through the windows. I could barely see the edges of furniture covered in white sheets. The house smelled faintly of damp wood and something sour, like rotten fruit. "Hello?" I called again. No answer. I took a few cautious steps inside, setting the pizza box down on what looked like a hallway table. I turned around to leave when I noticed a family portrait on the wall, faded and black and white. A man, a woman, and a young boy, probably 10 or 11. All of them staring into the camera with blank expressions. Something about the boy's face unsettled me. His eyes were darker than the rest, smudged, almost as if they'd been drawn on after the fact. I shook it off and walked back to the door. It slammed shut. Hard. I jumped and reached for the doorknob, but it wouldn't turn. I tried harder, twisting, pulling, kicking, but it was stuck, like someone was holding it from the other side. "Hey!" I yelled. "Let me out!" The house stayed silent. Then I heard the footsteps again, coming from upstairs. Slow, heavy. I looked up the staircase and saw movement at the top. A shadow. It stepped back out of view before I could make out details. My heart was pounding. I pulled my phone from my pocket and turned on the flashlight. The beam was weak, but it lit up the hallway enough to show that I was alone, at least down there. I tried the door one more time. Still stuck. The footsteps came again, down the stairs this time. I backed up until I was pressed against the wall, my breath shallow. I pointed the light at the staircase. That's when I saw him. A boy, same as in the photo, same clothes, but his eyes weren't just dark, they were empty. No pupils, no whites, just two hollow voids. He stared at me, not blinking. His face was pale, sickly, and he was whispering something. I couldn't make out the words, but they filled the air around me like static. My ears rang, my vision blurred, and I felt a pressure building in my chest like I couldn't breathe. He stepped closer. I tried to move, but couldn't. My legs were locked in place. He reached out one hand, palm up, then he spoke clearly. "You're late." I blinked, and he was gone. The front door creaked open behind me. I didn't think, I just ran. Out the door, down the steps, across the gravel. I didn't stop until I was back in my car, doors locked, engine running. I peeled out of there like a bat out of hell. I didn't go back to Angelo's that night. I drove straight home, heart still thudding in my chest. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I returned the car and told Angelo what happened. He listened quietly, nodding every so often. When I finished, he sighed. "You're not the first," he said. "What do you mean?" I asked. "That house," he said, "was abandoned 20 years ago. Family used to live there. The son, he was your age when he disappeared. The parents died a few years later. No one's lived there since." "Then who keeps ordering the damn pizzas?" I asked. Angelo just looked at me, tired. Every now and then, same order, same voice, always late at night, and the same story from whoever we send. "Why do you keep delivering there?" He looked away. "Some debts aren't worth questioning." I quit the next day. For years, I tried to forget about that night. I told myself I imagined it, that I was overtired, stressed, hallucinating. But then 3 years later, I was living in another city, working another job, and one night I found a receipt slipped under my apartment door. It was from Angelo's. No return address, just the same handwriting, the same words. "Elmhurst Lane, you're late." Story the end. It was a Wednesday night in late October when I got the call for a delivery. I worked the late shift at a small family-owned pizzeria just outside of town, in a place that straddled the edge of suburbia and forest land. We didn't get too many orders past 10 p.m., and honestly, I'd already started wiping down the counter and getting ready to close up when the phone rang. The caller ID didn't show a number. That wasn't uncommon. Sometimes people had private numbers or blocked IDs. But what was weird was that the address wasn't in our system, which was strange because we only delivered within a certain radius. I hesitated for a moment, staring at the yellowed map tacked to the corkboard by the oven. I found the street, Long Hollow Road, but it was right at the fringe of where we'd ever gone before. I almost said no. I should have said no. But the guy on the phone sounded old, maybe in his 70s. His voice was shaky, almost breathless. "Please," he said. "Just a large pepperoni, nothing fancy. Cash tip." So I took the order. I figured it'd be my last one for the night. I threw the pizza in the oven, jotted down the address, and 20 minutes later I was pulling out of the parking lot with the insulated bag riding shotgun. Long Hollow Road wasn't a road so much as a narrow path broken up by patches of gravel and dirt. It was flanked by thick woods on either side, barely lit by my headlights. There weren't any houses in sight for the first 5 minutes. Just trees, shadows, and an eerie stillness that seemed unnatural, even for a forest. Finally, I saw it. A mailbox leaning at an angle, almost swallowed by weeds. The numbers were scratched and worn, but I could barely make out the address. I turned onto the dirt driveway and immediately felt my tires bump over rocks and uneven earth. The house was set far back, partially hidden by tall, overgrown brush. It was a 2-story place, probably once beautiful, but now covered in chipped paint and patches of black mold. The front porch sagged in the middle, and most of the windows were either boarded up or broken. Still, I was already there. I figured the guy probably just didn't have the money to keep the place up. I grabbed the pizza, stepped out of the car, and walked up the path. The air was weirdly cold, colder than it had been back in town. I remember thinking how fast the temperature seemed to drop as soon as I turned onto that road. My breath came out in thick clouds, even though it had only been mildly chilly when I left the pizzeria. I knocked on the door. No answer. I waited, knocked again, and was about to call out when the door creaked open. Not fully, just a few inches. I peered inside but couldn't see much, just a narrow hallway, dimly lit by a flickering light bulb hanging from the ceiling. "Hello?" I called. "Pizza delivery?" There was a pause, then a faint rustling like someone shuffling across carpet. An old man appeared at the far end of the hall, hunched over, his face hidden in the shadow. "Just leave it on the table there," he said, motioning toward a small end table by the doorway. I stepped inside, placed the box down, and turned back toward the door. But before I could say anything, the man said something that made me freeze. "You brought the exact change, didn't you?" I stopped. "No, I've got change, if you..." I said exact change. His voice had shifted. It was no longer trembling or frail. It was harsh, low, like someone entirely different had spoken. I turned to look at him again, but he was gone. The hallway was empty. I backed up a few steps and reached for the doorknob, but it wouldn't turn. The door wouldn't open. Panicking, I rattled it, yanked on it, even kicked it once, but nothing. It was like it had locked from the outside. I pulled out my phone to call my boss, but I had no signal. Just a blank screen and the time, 11:23 p.m. I turned back toward the hallway. The light was still flickering, but now I saw movement at the top of the stairs. A figure, small, maybe a child. It stood there silently, barely illuminated. I couldn't make out its face. Hey, kid," I said, my voice cracking. "Is your grandpa here?" "The door won't open." The figure didn't move. "Look, this isn't funny, all right? I just want to leave." Then it moved. Not walked. Slid like its feet weren't even touching the ground. It glided down the hallway, silently, until it was standing just a few feet away. It wasn't a child. It was too small, yes, but the proportions were wrong. Its arms were long, bony, its skin almost gray. The head was too large, the eyes too black. And it was smiling, not with its mouth, but with something else, like the entire presence of it radiated malice. I backed up, felt my heel hit the table, and stumbled. The pizza box slid to the floor. I scrambled to my feet and bolted down the hall toward what looked like the back door. Locked. I turned and saw more of them. 3, maybe 4, standing at the base of the stairs, shoulder to shoulder, each of them exactly alike. No sound, no movement, just watching. Then the lights went out. Total blackness. I reached for my phone, turned on the flashlight, and spun around. The hallway looked different. Longer. The walls were wider, lined with doors that hadn't been there before. It felt impossible, like the house had rearranged itself while I blinked. I tried one of the doors, locked. Another, also locked. I was breathing hard now, panicking, sweating even though the air was freezing. A voice whispered, right behind my ear. Not the exact change. I screamed and turned, but nothing was there. I ran down the hall, my phone light bouncing off the warped wallpaper and cracked floorboards. A door at the end was slightly ajar, glowing faintly with orange light. I pushed it open and found myself in what looked like an old dining room. There was a table set for 6, covered in dust and cobwebs. Plates of moldy food sat untouched, silverware tarnished and black. At the head of the table sat the old man, or what was left of him, hollow eyes, sunken cheeks, skin like paper. He didn't speak, didn't move, just sat there, smiling. Behind him, standing in the shadows, were the children again. They stepped forward, slowly this time, their heads tilted in unison. Payment, one of them said. The old man finally moved. He lifted one arm and pointed at me. You owe, he whispered. We always collect. I turned and ran back through the door, but the hallway was gone. I was in a narrow tunnel now, wooden beams along the ceiling like some old mine shaft. The air smelled of rot and something else, something like burning hair. I didn't stop running. I just followed the path, hoping it led back outside. I tripped twice, scraped my knees, dropped my phone, but I kept going. Finally, I saw light, a thin strip of it at the end of the tunnel. I crawled toward it, pushed open a broken wooden hatch, and fell out into the backyard of the house. I didn't stop to look around. I sprinted to my car, jumped in, and peeled out of the driveway so fast I nearly drove into a ditch. Back at the pizzeria, my manager was furious. He thought I'd bailed mid-shift. I tried to explain, told him about the house, the people, or whatever they were, but he just shook his head. We've never delivered to Long Hollow, he said. It's outside our range. Always has been. I pulled the order slip from my pocket. It was blank, no name, no address, just the time, 10:41 p.m., and one large pepperoni. I quit the next day. I couldn't go back. Not after that. For weeks afterward, I'd wake up in the middle of the night and hear something scratching at my door. I'd see shadows move across the hallway when no one else was home. Once, I woke up to find a single slice of pepperoni pizza sitting on my kitchen counter, cold, greasy, and smelling faintly of ash. I moved 2 towns over, changed my number, took a job that didn't require deliveries, but every so often I still dream about that hallway, the flickering light, the locked doors, the children waiting at the bottom of the stairs. And in the dream, I never have the exact change, and I never get out. Story the end. The summer I turned 22, I was working as a delivery driver for a pizza place called Marco's out in a small town in northern Pennsylvania. It was one of those towns where people either grow up and never leave or come through on their way to somewhere more exciting. I was in the first group. The pay at Marco's wasn't great, but it was easy work, and on weekends, the tips made up for the rest. Plus, the manager, Ben, didn't care if you stretched the rules a little, as long as you didn't cause trouble. This one night started like any other. It was mid-July, hot and sticky. The kind of night where the pavement still radiates heat well after sunset. I was doing my usual routine, taking short trips, smoking half a cigarette between runs, and checking my phone at red lights. It was around 9:15 when Ben called out from the kitchen, "Tommy, one more before you clock out. Weird address, though." I stepped around the counter to grab the ticket from the order hook. It was a medium pepperoni with extra cheese and a 2-liter of Coke. But the address was strange. 16 Old Mill Road. Now, I'd lived in this town my whole life and delivered pizzas to every trailer, farmhouse, and back road cabin you could think of. But I'd never heard of Old Mill Road. I asked Ben where it was. He scratched his head, said it came in online, prepaid but with a cash tip. He handed me a folded map someone had dropped off years ago for local trails and hidden paths. I traced the route with my finger, turn off the highway past mile marker 22, onto a gravel road, then onto a dirt lane. Real backwoods stuff. The customer's instructions just said, "Drive to the end. You'll see the house." I didn't like it, but I also didn't want to seem like a coward. So I loaded up the pizza and the soda and hit the road. It took me about 20 minutes to get out there. The highway was empty, just stretches of trees and the occasional deer in the ditch. I found the gravel road, which jutted off at a sharp angle, almost like it didn't want to be found. My headlights caught dust and dead grass as I rolled slowly forward, careful not to kick up rocks. After about a mile, the gravel turned to dirt, just like the map said. It narrowed between thick rows of pine trees, the kind that block out the moonlight completely. My radio crackled into static and my GPS froze before fading to black. No signal. Then I saw it. A house. It wasn't exactly at the end of the road like they'd said, more like tucked behind some leaning trees, half hidden by shadow. 2 stories, peeling white paint, and windows with those sagging curtains that looked like they hadn't moved in years. There was no porch light, no cars, no sign of life. But the front door was wide open. Now, I've seen my share of weird people on deliveries. You get used to all kinds. Once I delivered to a guy wearing nothing but a rubber horse mask. Another time, someone answered the door while holding a raccoon like it was a baby. So I've learned to roll with it. Still, there was something off here. I got out of the car with the pizza and Coke in hand, glanced back at the road, and debated whether this tip was going to be worth it. My car headlights cast long shadows across the overgrown yard, and the bugs buzzed like tiny electric saws. "Hello?" I called out, stepping carefully onto the warped front steps. "Pizza delivery!" No answer. I paused at the open doorway. The inside was dark, and the air coming from it was colder than it should have been for a July night. Smelled like mildew and old fabric. I hesitated, but then thought about the cash tip. Probably someone drunk or high who forgot they ordered. I stepped inside. The entryway was dimly lit by moonlight leaking through the windows. A hallway stretched in front of me, and to the left was a living room. I stepped in a little farther. That's when I noticed it. The house was completely silent. No hum of a fridge, no ticking clock, not even the creaks and groans old houses usually make. Just a thick, oppressive stillness. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Upstairs. Slow, deliberate, like someone walking barefoot on wood. "Hey, you home?" I called out again, "I've got your pizza." No response. Just those footsteps, continuing then stopping abruptly. I stood there, frozen. The pizza box felt heavier in my hands, the Coke bottle slick with condensation. Then I heard another noise, like a child laughing, distant and echoing as if from inside a pipe. That did it. I turned to leave, but the door I'd entered through now closed and locked. I didn't remember closing it. I rushed over, twisting the knob. Nothing. I tried pulling. It didn't budge. "Okay, screw this," I muttered. I looked around for another way out. Through the living room was a set of French doors, glass panes coated with grime. I headed that way, but the moment I crossed the threshold, I felt something change. The air was different, heavier. My ears popped like I was underwater. Then the smell hit me. Rot. Not just old food or garbage, something worse, like something that had died weeks ago and was just now being disturbed. I gagged, backing up, and nearly tripped over something. I looked down and saw a doll. Old-fashioned, cloth body, face sewn with button eyes and a crooked stitched mouth. One arm was missing. It looked damp like it had been in the rain. Then came the voice. "Are you the new one?" It was right behind me. I spun around. Nothing there, but I felt it. Cold breath on my neck, a presence. I dropped the pizza box. I heard the footsteps again, this time faster, almost a run, from upstairs. Then a thud, like something heavy falling. I bolted for the stairs without thinking. I didn't want to go up, but something in me said the front door wouldn't open unless I did. Each step groaned under my weight. I reached the top and found a hallway lined with doors. One at the end was cracked open, glowing with a faint orange light. I moved toward it. The light flickered like firelight, but there was no smell of smoke. Inside the room was a child's nursery. Rocking chair, small bed, faded wallpaper with cartoon animals. The light came from a candle on the floor, and beside the candle, sitting upright, was a small figure, a child, or something like a child. Its head was tilted too far to one side, the neck bent unnaturally. The skin was waxy and pale, like candle wax left in the sun. Its eyes opened suddenly, wide and black. No whites, just void. "Do you want to play?" it asked, voice raspy like old wood dragging across stone. I backed away, but behind me the hallway was gone. Gone, replaced by a wall. I turned back. The child was standing now, the candle gone, the room dim. "I waited for you," it said. "They never bring them far enough, but you came all the way in." I couldn't move. The floor beneath me began to bend and shift like waves. The room stretched again, longer, darker. The walls peeled back to reveal wooden beams, bones between them, like part of the frame. Then I was falling. The floor gave out, and I dropped through blackness. I woke up in my car. Headlights still on. The pizza box was gone. I was parked at the end of the dirt road. The house, nowhere to be seen, just trees and darkness. I drove back to Marco's in silence. Ben asked where the pizza went. I said the customer never showed. He just grunted and told me to take off early. I went home and didn't sleep. The next day, I went to the town library and looked up Old Mill Road. Found a single article from 1987. A house had stood out there, owned by a man named Cyrus Becker. Lived there with his daughter. The girl disappeared one night, and a week later, Cyrus was found dead, hanged in the nursery. The house was abandoned after that. Burned down in 1994 after teenagers broke in and started a fire. No one rebuilt. The land's been empty since. I never saw that address on another delivery ticket again. But some nights, when I drive past mile marker 22, I see that gravel road. And sometimes, just for a second, I think I see a flicker of candlelight deep in the trees. Story the end. It was a Wednesday night in late October when I got the call for a delivery. I worked the late shift at a small family-owned pizzeria just outside of town, in a place that straddled the edge of suburbia and forest land. We didn't get too many orders past 10 p.m., and honestly, I'd already started wiping down the counter and getting ready to close up when the phone rang. The caller ID didn't show a number. That wasn't uncommon. Sometimes people had private numbers or blocked IDs. But what was weird was that the address wasn't in our system, which was strange because we only delivered within a certain radius. I hesitated for a moment, staring at the yellowed map tacked to the corkboard by the oven. I found the street, Long Hollow Road, but it was right at the fringe of where we'd ever gone before. I almost said no. I should have said no, but the guy on the phone sounded old, maybe in his 70s. His voice was shaky, almost breathless. "Please," he said. "Just a large pepperoni. Nothing fancy. Cash tip." So I took the order. I figured it'd be my last one for the night. I threw the pizza in the oven, jotted down the address, and 20 minutes later, I was pulling out of the parking lot with the insulated bag riding shotgun. Long Hollow Road wasn't a road so much as a narrow path broken up by patches of gravel and dirt. It was flanked by thick woods on either side, barely lit by my headlights. There weren't any houses in sight for the first 5 minutes, just trees, shadows, and an eerie stillness that seemed unnatural, even for a forest. Finally, I saw it. A mailbox leaning at an angle, almost swallowed by weeds. The numbers were scratched and worn, but I could barely make out the address. I turned onto the dirt driveway and immediately felt my tires bump over rocks and uneven earth. The house was set far back, partially hidden by tall, overgrown brush. It was a 2-story place, probably once beautiful, but now covered in chipped paint and patches of black mold. The front porch sagged in the middle, and most of the windows were either boarded up or broken. Still, I was already there. I figured the guy probably just didn't have the money to keep the place up. I grabbed the pizza, stepped out of the car, and walked up the path. The air was weirdly cold, colder than it had been back in town. I remember thinking how fast the temperature seemed to drop as soon as I turned onto that road. My breath came out in thick clouds, even though it had only been mildly chilly when I left the pizzeria. I knocked on the door. No answer. I waited, knocked again, and was about to call out when the door creaked open. Not fully, just a few inches. I peered inside but couldn't see much. Just a narrow hallway, dimly lit by a flickering light bulb hanging from the ceiling. "Hello?" I called. "Pizza delivery?" There was a pause, then a faint rustling like someone shuffling across carpet. An old man appeared at the far end of the hall, hunched over, his face hidden in the shadow. "Just leave it on the table there," he said, motioning toward a small end table by the doorway. I stepped inside, placed the box down, and turned back toward the door. But before I could say anything, the man said something that made me freeze. "You brought the exact change, didn't you?" I stopped. "No, I've got change if you—" I said exact change. His voice had shifted. It was no longer trembling or frail. It was harsh, low, like someone entirely different had spoken. I turned to look at him again, but he was gone. The hallway was empty. I backed up a few steps and reached for the doorknob, but it wouldn't turn. The door wouldn't open. Panicking, I rattled it, yanked on it, even kicked it once, but nothing. It was like it had locked from the outside. I pulled out my phone to call my boss, but I had no signal. Just a blank screen and the time, 11:23 p.m. I turned back toward the hallway. The light was still flickering, but now I saw movement at the top of the stairs. A figure, small, maybe a child. It stood there silently, barely illuminated. I couldn't make out its face. Hey, kid," I said, my voice cracking. "Is your grandpa here? The door won't open." The figure didn't move. "Look, this isn't funny, all right? I just want to leave." Then it moved. Not walked. Slid like its feet weren't even touching the ground. It glided down the hallway, silently, until it was standing just a few feet away. It wasn't a child. It was too small, yes, but the proportions were wrong. Its arms were long, bony, its skin almost gray. The head was too large, the eyes too black, and it was smiling, not with its mouth, but with something else, like the entire presence of it radiated malice. I backed up, felt my heel hit the table, and stumbled. The pizza box slid to the floor. I scrambled to my feet and bolted down the hall toward what looked like the back door. Locked. I turned and saw more of them, 3, maybe 4, standing at the base of the stairs, shoulder to shoulder, each of them exactly alike. No sound, no movement, just watching. Then the lights went out. Total blackness. I reached for my phone, turned on the flashlight, and spun around. The hallway looked different. Longer. The walls were wider, lined with doors that hadn't been there before. It felt impossible, like the house had rearranged itself while I blinked. I tried one of the doors. Locked. Another. Also locked. I was breathing hard now, panicking, sweating even though the air was freezing. A voice whispered, right behind my ear, "Not the exact change." I screamed and turned, but nothing was there. I ran down the hall, my phone light bouncing off the warped wallpaper and cracked floorboards. A door at the end was slightly ajar, glowing faintly with orange light. I pushed it open and found myself in what looked like an old dining room. There was a table set for 6, covered in dust and cobwebs. Plates of moldy food sat untouched, silverware tarnished and black. At the head of the table sat the old man, or what was left of him, hollow eyes, sunken cheeks, skin like paper. He didn't speak, didn't move, just sat there, smiling. Behind him, standing in the shadows, were the children again. They stepped forward, slowly this time, their heads tilted in unison. "Payment," one of them said. The old man finally moved. He lifted one arm and pointed at me. "You owe," he whispered. "We always collect." I turned and ran, back through the door, but the hallway was gone. I was in a narrow tunnel now, wooden beams along the ceiling like some old mine shaft. The air smelled of rot and something else, something like burning hair. I didn't stop running. I just followed the path, hoping it led back outside. I tripped twice, scraped my knees, dropped my phone, but I kept going. Finally, I saw light, a thin strip of it at the end of the tunnel. I crawled toward it, pushed open a broken wooden hatch, and fell out into the backyard of the house. I didn't stop to look around. I sprinted to my car, jumped in, and peeled out of the driveway so fast I nearly drove into a ditch. Back at the pizzeria, my manager was furious. He thought I'd bailed mid-shift. I tried to explain, told him about the house, the people, or whatever they were, but he just shook his head. "We've never delivered to Long Hollow," he said. "It's outside our range, always has been." I pulled the order slip from my pocket. It was blank. No name, no address, just the time, 10:41 p.m., and one large pepperoni. I quit the next day. I couldn't go back. Not after that. For weeks afterward, I'd wake up in the middle of the night and hear something scratching at my door. I'd see shadows move across the hallway when no one else was home. Once I woke up to find a single slice of pepperoni pizza sitting on my kitchen counter, cold, greasy, and smelling faintly of ash. I moved 2 towns over, changed my number, took a job that didn't require deliveries. But every so often, I still dream about that hallway, the flickering light, the locked doors, the children waiting at the bottom of the stairs. And in the dream, I never have the exact change, and I never get out. Story the end. The night I started my shift at Tony's Pizza, it was just like any other. I clocked in around 6 p.m., slipping into my usual routine, answering calls, folding boxes, and loading the delivery bags with piping hot pies. The summer heat had broken with a cold snap, and the streets glistened wet from an early evening drizzle. The parking lot was almost empty, which meant the orders would trickle in slowly, giving me time to breathe between deliveries. Around 10:15 p.m., my phone buzzed with the next delivery. The ticket read, "Order, large meat lovers, breadsticks, and 2 sodas. Address, 1425 Pinecrest Drive. Special instructions, back gate code 9632. Leave on porch. No contact." I didn't think much of it at first. The address was in the far end of town, a quiet neighborhood I had delivered to a few times before. The back gate code was new, though, so I jotted it down carefully. I grabbed the order from the kitchen and secured it in my thermal bag. Before I left, the manager reminded me, "That area gets kind of quiet and dark at night. Watch your back." I smiled, waved it off, and hopped in my beat-up sedan. The drive to Pinecrest was about 20 minutes. As I cruised through the familiar streets, the drizzle had stopped but left everything damp and shimmering under streetlights. Pinecrest was an older neighborhood, and full of big houses with overgrown yards and tall hedges. Most people left their porch lights on, but some didn't. which always made late-night deliveries a little more nerve-wracking. When I arrived at 1425, I noticed the front gate was tall, wrought iron, and chained with a keypad. The streetlight above flickered erratically, casting shifting shadows onto the driveway. I checked my notes, 9632. I punched it in. The gate clicked and slowly creaked open. The house itself sat at the end of a long driveway, mostly hidden behind dense trees and bushes. From what I could see, the lawn hadn't been mowed in weeks, and the porch light was out. I stepped out of the car and felt the cool night air brush my skin. The usual smell of wet earth and pine filled my nose. The instructions said to leave the pizza on the porch, so I walked up cautiously, the gravel crunching beneath my shoes. I set the bag down on the steps and called out, "Pizza delivery." Nothing. I glanced around. The house was dark and silent, except for the occasional creak of wood settling. I pulled out my phone and tried calling the number on the ticket. No answer. Just voicemail. Shrugging, I turned back toward my car, but then heard a soft thump behind me. My heart jumped. I spun around. The bag was still there, untouched. No sign of anyone. A cold breeze swept past, rustling dead leaves. I felt an uneasy chill, but told myself it was just the wind. I got back into the car and started the engine. As I pulled away, I caught a glimpse of a shadow moving behind one of the windows on the second floor. Quick and silent. I blinked. The shadow was gone. Back at the pizza place, I reported the delivery as complete. The manager frowned. "You didn't actually see anyone, did you?" "No. No answer at the door or on the phone." He nodded. "That house has been empty for a while. The last owners vanished. Nobody's lived there for years." I raised my eyebrows. "Then why did they call for pizza?" Beats me. The next night, the same address popped up again, this time with the same order, same instructions. Curious and a little creeped out, I asked the manager if anyone else had made that delivery recently. "Nope, you're the only one." I sighed and decided I'd take it again. When I arrived, the gate was locked, but the code worked again. The driveway looked even more sinister in the dim moonlight. The house looked untouched, but frozen in time, with peeling paint and cracked windows. I set the pizza on the porch as before. This time, I lingered for a moment. I called out softly, "Hello, pizza delivery." A faint noise, like footsteps, came from inside the house. I froze. A soft whisper followed. "Thank you." The hairs on my neck stood up. I ran back to my car and sped off. The next day, I did some digging online about the house. Apparently, the last family who lived there disappeared without a trace 5 years ago. Police never solved the case. Neighbors reported strange noises and lights in the windows at night, but no one dared get close. That night, I got the order again. I debated refusing, but needed the money. When I got to the house, the gate code no longer worked. I called the number. No answer. The only light came from my car's headlights and the dim moon overhead. I got out and looked for another way in. I found a side gate slightly open. I hesitated but pushed it open and walked cautiously through the overgrown yard. I heard the faint sound of crying. Following the sound, I approached a window and peeked inside. The room was empty, except for an old rocking chair moving back and forth by itself. The crying stopped, then a whisper, "Please." I stumbled back, heart pounding. Suddenly, the door behind me slammed shut. I spun around, but the gate had vanished. Panic set in. I pulled out my phone. No signal. I ran back toward where I'd come from, but the yard seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. The whispering grew louder, overlapping voices pleading, calling, "Stay, don't go." I ran until I broke through the trees and saw the main road again. I jumped into my car, locked the doors, and sped away. After that night, I quit delivery entirely. But sometimes late at night, my phone buzzes with an order for 1425 Pinecrest Drive, the gate code, and instructions to leave the pizza on the porch. I never answer, and I don't go back. Story the end. It was one of those slow, cold autumn nights when the town felt like it had been swallowed by darkness. The streets were empty, and the usual hum of life was replaced by the eerie quiet that settles after midnight. I was working the late shift at Luigi's Pizza, the local joint that stayed open till 2 a.m. Most nights were boring, just a few orders trickling in from insomniacs and college students pulling all-nighters. But that night, I was about to experience something that would make me rethink every delivery I ever took. The call came in just after 1 a.m. It was a delivery to a place called Maple Grove, a neighborhood on the edge of town known mostly for its rundown houses and long-abandoned buildings. I'd been working there for a few months, but hadn't ventured much into that area after dark. The dispatcher said the order was prepaid online, with a generous tip, so I didn't question it. The address was 138 Maple Grove Lane. I loaded the order into my delivery bag, 2 large pizzas, 1 pepperoni, 1 vegetarian, and got into my aging sedan. The engine rattled a bit as I turned onto the main road heading out of town. The fog was thick, rolling low over the fields and creeping into the trees that lined the road. The headlights barely penetrated the gloom. As I drove deeper into Maple Grove, the streetlights thinned out, and the houses became spaced farther apart. Most of them looked abandoned, broken windows, sagging porches, paint peeling off in wide strips. The road curved sharply, and I caught glimpses of old gravestones peeking out behind rusted iron fences. That's when the unease started to settle in. I checked the GPS, which told me to turn left onto a narrow lane. The street sign was barely legible, something like Ashwood Drive. I hesitated, but turned anyway. The road was a single lane, cracked and overgrown with weeds pushing up through the pavement. I pulled up to the house number, 138. It was a 2-story Victorian that looked like it hadn't been cared for in decades. The porch sagged under the weight of years, and the windows were dark except for one faint flicker of candlelight in an upstairs window. I got out, carrying the bag in one hand and my flashlight in the other. The air was colder here, biting at my skin despite my jacket. I walked up the creaky steps to the front door and rang the bell. Nothing. I knocked hard instead. After a long pause, the door slowly creaked open a crack. A faint smell of damp wood and something else like smoke mixed with decay wafted out. "Pizza delivery," I called softly. A pale, thin hand beckoned me inside before I could say more. Against my better judgment, I stepped into the foyer. The house smelled like it was rotting from the inside out. Dust hung in the air, disturbed by my movement. The dim candlelight cast shadows that flickered and danced, making the peeling wallpaper look alive. "Right this way," whispered a voice, barely above a breath. I followed it down a long hallway, the floorboards creaking beneath my boots. There was no furniture except for an old wooden chair placed against the wall, its seat covered in a thick layer of dust. I passed portraits on the walls, faded images of somber-looking people with eyes that seemed to follow me. At the end of the hall, a door opened into a sitting room bathed in candlelight. An elderly woman sat in a rocking chair near the fireplace. Her eyes were wide and glassy, her hands clutching a faded quilt. She smiled weakly. "Thank you for coming," she said, voice fragile. I handed over the pizza bag and took a step back. Suddenly, a loud banging echoed from upstairs, like someone pounding on the floorboards. The woman's smile vanished, replaced by a terrified look. "They're here," she whispered. Before I could ask who they were, a cold breeze swept through the room, snuffing out the candles. The room plunged into darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight, clicking it on. The beam cut through the blackness, landing on a figure standing at the top of the stairs, tall, shadowed, face obscured. The woman screamed, "Run!" I didn't hesitate. I bolted for the door, but it slammed shut in front of me with a force that shook the walls. I pushed against it desperately, but it wouldn't budge. The figure at the stairs began descending, slow and deliberate, its presence crushing. Panic surged through me. I looked around for another exit and spotted a small door leading to the basement. I darted toward it and flung it open, plunging into cold darkness. The basement was damp and smelled of mold. I tripped over loose bricks as I scrambled down the stairs. The door slammed above me. I was trapped. My flashlight flickered and died, leaving me in complete darkness except for a faint glow coming from a corner. As I moved closer, I saw it was a small altar with candles burning despite the lack of air. Around it were old photographs of the house's previous occupants, smiling faces frozen in time. Then a whisper curled through the darkness, cold and menacing. "You shouldn't be here." I froze, heart pounding. Suddenly, cold hands gripped my shoulders, icy and unrelenting. I screamed and wrenched free, scrambling up the stairs. The door was still locked tight. I pounded on it with all my strength, shouting for help. Then, as suddenly as it slammed, the door creaked open. The candlelight flickered back to life upstairs. The elderly woman stood there, tears streaming down her face. "Go," she said urgently. "Leave before they take you too." I didn't wait for another word. I ran out of the house, down the lane, and didn't stop until I reached my car. As I drove back toward town, my hands trembling on the wheel, I glanced in the rearview mirror. At the edge of the driveway, the woman stood in the shadows, watching me go. I never took another delivery to Maple Grove after that night. Story the end. The clock had just struck midnight when the order came in. I was working the late shift at Luigi's Pizzeria, a small family-run joint on the edge of town. Most nights were routine: order, delivery, tip, repeat. But that night would change everything. The phone rang, shrill and urgent. The woman on the line gave an address I didn't recognize, 78 Maple Grove Lane. It was a street I'd never been to, out past the newer suburbs, edging into the older, more forgotten part of town where the streetlights were sparse and the houses looked abandoned. The order was a large pepperoni pizza with extra cheese and a 2-liter of soda. I double-checked the address on the GPS and shrugged. Not too far, maybe 20 minutes tops. I grabbed the pizza from the warmer, packed it carefully into the insulated bag, and headed out. The night was unusually cold for early spring, and a thick mist hovered close to the ground. As I drove, the roads narrowed, and the trees seemed to close in. Streetlights gave way to flickering lamps that barely illuminated the cracked pavement. When I reached Maple Grove Lane, the houses looked like relics, paint peeling, windows shuttered or broken, yards wild with overgrown weeds. I pulled up in front of number 78. The house was a 2-story Victorian, sagging under years of neglect. The porch light buzzed dimly, casting long, jittery shadows. I took the pizza bag and walked up the creaking steps, my boots crunching on dead leaves. I rang the doorbell and waited. No answer. I knocked gently. Still nothing. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness inviting me in. "Hello?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. The air inside was cold, stale, and heavy with dust. A faint sound came from upstairs, a soft, dragging noise like something heavy being pulled along the floorboards. My heart pounded, but I told myself it was just an old house settling. I set the pizza on a dusty table near the door. Then I heard it, a whisper, barely audible but unmistakable. "Thank you." A chill ran down my spine. I glanced around, but the house was empty. The whisper came again, closer this time. "Please, stay." The hairs on my neck stood up. I reached for my phone to call the shop, but the screen flickered and died. I tried the door, but it was locked tight. I was trapped. Suddenly, footsteps echoed down the stairs. Slow, deliberate, but heavier than a human's should be. A shadow moved in the corner of my eye. I turned quickly, but there was nothing there. Then a figure appeared at the top of the stairs, a woman in a faded white dress, her hair hanging in tangled strands. Her eyes were dark voids, and her mouth curved into a sad, knowing smile. "Eat," she whispered, pointing at the pizza. I shook my head, stepping back, but my feet felt rooted. She moved closer, the air around her growing colder. I could see faint scratches on her arms, bruises fading into her translucent skin. "Don't leave," she said. The door slammed shut. I heard laughter, soft, childlike, and eerie. I was frozen in place, the smell of old smoke and something metallic filling my nostrils. Then, out of the darkness, a small hand grabbed mine. It was ice cold. I looked down to see a little girl, her face streaked with dirt, eyes wide and pleading. "Play with me," she said. I yanked my hand free and ran for the door. It wouldn't budge. Frantic, I banged on the walls, shouted for help, but the house swallowed my voice. The temperature dropped further, and the woman's silhouette appeared again, blocking the only window. "Stay," she breathed. Desperation overtook me. I searched for another way out and spotted the stairs leading down to the basement. I hesitated, but had no choice. I crept down into the darkness. The stairs groaned beneath me. The basement was pitch black. I fumbled for my phone, but it was dead. Then a faint glow appeared in the corner, a candle flickering on a small table. Next to it was an old photo album, open to a picture of a happy family, a mother, father, and 2 children. The mother's eyes were scratched out. A sudden noise behind me made me spin around. The little girl was there, smiling. "Help us," she whispered. I understood then. This house held more than memories. It held trapped souls. I ran back up the stairs as the shadows closed in, breaking through the front door into the cold night air. Breathless, I got into my car and sped away, not daring to look back. The next day, I asked around about the house. The locals told me it had been empty for decades. The family vanished without a trace. No one had lived there since. I never took a delivery to Maple Grove Lane again. But sometimes, when the fog rolls in, I swear I can hear a soft voice calling my name, asking me to stay. Story the end. The first time I got a pizza delivery to 19 Briarwood Lane, I didn't think much of it. I'd been delivering pizzas part-time for nearly 2 years by then, working mostly the late-night shifts. It wasn't a big city or anything, just a small suburban town with quiet streets and a lot of older houses. I knew most of the neighborhoods pretty well, and deliveries were usually straightforward. Maybe a little awkward when the drunk college kids were involved, or when someone forgot their wallet. But Briarwood Lane was different. I'd heard the neighborhood was a little strange, but I never expected the kind of experience I had that night. It was late October, a chilly night with a thick fog rolling in from the nearby woods, the kind of night that muffled all sound and made street lamps glow dim and eerie through the haze. I'd been at work for about 4 hours, and the shop was just starting to slow down. Then the order popped up on the screen: a large pepperoni with extra cheese, a side of breadsticks, and a 2-liter of soda. The address was 19 Briarwood Lane. The order had no phone number, which was unusual, but the instructions said, "Knock once and wait. Do not ring the doorbell." I shrugged, grabbed the order, and set out. Briarwood Lane was on the edge of town, a little remote and surrounded by thick woods. When I pulled up in front of number 19, the house looked abandoned. The paint was peeling, the porch swing sagged crookedly, and the yard was overgrown with weeds and dead leaves. The front porch light flickered weakly, casting long shadows that danced across the cracked concrete steps. I parked and took the pizza bag out of the car. The night air was cold and damp, and I could hear the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. I stepped up to the porch and knocked once, just like the instructions said. There was no response. I waited a minute, calling out, "Pizza delivery!" But the house remained silent. As I turned to put the pizza down on the porch, I heard it, a faint whisper, almost like a sigh coming from inside the house. My skin prickled. I shook it off, told myself it was just the wind. I set the pizza down gently and started back to my car. As I passed the porch window, something moved, a flicker of movement inside, like a shadow passing behind the curtain. I stopped and stared, heart pounding. Then suddenly, the front door creaked open just a crack. "Hello?" I called out, voice shaky. No answer. I backed away slowly, jumped in the car, and sped off. When I got back to the shop, I told the manager about it. He looked at me oddly, then told me Briarwood Lane had a dark history. Years ago, a family had lived there, a mother, father, and their little girl. One night, a fire broke out, and the whole family died. The house had been empty ever since. People said it was haunted, that sometimes you could hear crying or see lights flickering inside at night. I didn't believe in ghosts, but the story stuck with me. A few nights later, the same order popped up again, same address, same instructions. I debated ignoring it, but I figured maybe the order had been mistakenly entered twice. I decided to deliver again. This time, when I knocked, the door opened slowly, wide enough for me to see inside. The hallway was pitch black, except for a faint glow coming from the staircase. I called out, "Pizza delivery." No response. I stepped inside, feeling the cold air rush past me. The house smelled like smoke and something burnt, even though the fire had been years ago. I set the pizza down on a small table near the stairs and turned to leave. That's when I saw it. A small figure, standing at the top of the staircase. A little girl, maybe 5 or 6 years old, with pale skin and dark hair. She looked right at me, eyes wide and empty, and then slowly disappeared. I bolted out of the house and slammed the door behind me. Back in my car, I sat shaking, trying to calm down. I told myself it was my imagination, that the fog and shadows were playing tricks. But I couldn't get that little girl's face out of my mind. For weeks, that order kept coming in. Every few nights, the same pizza, same address, same strange instructions. I stopped answering the call, but one night my coworker called in sick, and I had to cover. I warned the manager I wasn't going near Briarwood Lane again, but he just shrugged. When the order popped up again, I had no choice. That night, I drove out there with a knot in my stomach. The house looked worse. Windows boarded up, the porch light completely out. I knocked once, waited, but no door opened. I left the pizza on the porch and started back to my car when I heard footsteps behind me. Soft, small footsteps, running. I spun around, heart in my throat, but no one was there. I jumped in my car and left without looking back. After that night, I quit delivering to that neighborhood altogether. The manager told me the house at 19 Briarwood Lane had been condemned and was scheduled for demolition. The stories about the fire and the ghostly little girl were true, according to the old neighbors who still talked about it. To this day, I don't know who ordered those pizzas or why they kept coming. I don't want to know. Every time I think about that little girl's empty eyes and that cold, silent house, I feel that same chill in my bones. I've had other strange deliveries since, but nothing like Briarwood Lane. Sometimes the past just refuses to stay buried. Story the end. It was a chilly Friday night, and the pizza place where I worked was buzzing more than usual. The football game had just ended, and orders were pouring in. I was on delivery duty, driving my old Honda Civic through familiar streets, balancing the smell of fresh pizza and the growing tension in the air. I'd been working here for a couple of months, and at first it was all about the tips and the easy hours. But that night, things felt different. The order came in just after midnight. 1 large supreme pizza, extra cheese, going to 49 Elm Street. I had delivered there before. It was a modest neighborhood, quiet at this hour, with well-kept homes and neat lawns. Nothing unusual. But when the dispatcher read off the address, she added, "The customer said to be careful with this one. Said it's important." I shrugged it off and grabbed the pizza from the counter. The driver before me had just returned, and his face was pale as he mumbled something about a weird feeling at the house on Elm Street. I didn't pay it much mind. Everyone working late gets spooked now and then. Driving down Elm Street, the night was crisp, and the fog was settling in thick patches near the trees lining the sidewalk. The streetlights cast long, flickering shadows, and the silence was heavier than usual. I pulled up to number 49, an older 2-story home with a porch light dimmed to a faint glow. It looked normal enough, but the air around it felt cold, and I shivered despite the jacket I wore. I took the pizza bag in one hand and the money in the other, stepped up on the porch, and rang the doorbell. There was no immediate answer. I knocked. Nothing. I tried the handle, and it opened. I hesitated, but decided to step inside just enough to call out. "Hello? Pizza delivery," I said, voice echoing faintly in the quiet house. No response. I stepped in a bit further and heard a faint sound upstairs. Soft footsteps, maybe? The wood floor creaked under me. Then a whisper floated down from above, so faint I wasn't sure if I'd imagined it. "Thank you." Curious and a little unnerved, I called back, "Are you here to pick up the pizza?" A slow shuffle came from the stairs, then a shadow crossed the hallway at the top of the landing. I squinted but couldn't make out a face. "I'm right here," the voice whispered again, more urgent now. I carefully made my way to the stairs, gripping the pizza box tightly. The old wood groaned with every step, and the air was colder up here. The house smelled faintly of dust and something metallic like rust or old blood. I reached the landing, looking down a long hallway lined with closed doors. At the end, a door creaked open and a woman stepped out. She looked pale, her clothes outdated, like something from decades ago. Her eyes were sunken, but she smiled softly. "Thank you for bringing this," she said, taking the pizza box. "You're very kind." I nodded, feeling a chill run down my spine. Something was off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. As I turned to leave, I noticed the family photos on the walls. They were old, yellowed, and all featured the same woman, standing alone year after year, never aging. I stepped back toward the stairs when I heard a low growl from behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing there. The shadows in the corners seemed to stretch and move on their own. The woman watched me with sad eyes. "You shouldn't stay," she said softly. I hurried downstairs, feeling a cold hand brush my arm. I jerked away and dashed out the door, fumbling to get into my car. As I drove off, the house behind me looked like any other in the neighborhood, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just been part of something not quite right. That was the last time I ever delivered to Elm Street. Weeks later, I found out that the house had been abandoned for years, and the woman I saw was believed to have died there under mysterious circumstances long ago. Some say she still waits for someone to bring her pizza. Story the end.